In a small village of the Angamis, there lived an old woman. She was the saddest person alive in those hills. Many years ago, a tiger had killed her husband and 7 sons, and her heart had still not healed. She spent long, lonely days waiting for the hour when she would join her loved ones in death. One afternoon, the woman was drying paddy outside her house when all of a sudden the sun disappeared and a raindrop fell on her from the sky. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She was happy again, and the son grew up to be a mighty warrior who avenged his father and 7 brothers. When did it happen? Where are the woman and her son now? Oh, it happened a very long time ago, and it will happen again. I don't understand. You will, little one, when the time is right. Now go to sleep.
Everyone, please welcome Easterine Kire, a prolific writer, an award-winning writer, and a writer who deals much, not always, but much with Nagaland in her stories. My name is Fredrik Elg. I represent the organization SHIFT, Safe Havens and Freedom Talks, and this is a Freedom Talk with Easterine Kire. It was announced that a third person was supposed to be with us, Malin Thor Tureby, a professor in oral history. Unfortunately, she could not join. She was not feeling well, so it will be just me and Easterine. So let's go back to the book that you were reading from, which is called Son of the Thundercloud. It is about a man, Pelevotso. He's forced to leave his village because of a terrible, terrible famine. And on his long walk, he encounters 2 ancient ladies. They're very old. They're more than 200 years old. They're sisters. And they ask him to look for the village of weavers. And on the way, they walk together. And on the way, they meet the third sister. And I would like to ask Easterine to read that passage when they meet the third sister.
Their quickened pace brought them down the hill rather fast, and the village of weavers lay just a few meters from the foot of the hill. The sisters ran ahead of Pelle, heading straight for a little house of thatch that stood alone by itself. Pelle followed, keeping a little distance between them and himself. Mesanjo, they both called out together as they approached the house. The owner of the name opened the door immediately and they entered the house, the sisters followed by Pelle. Mesanjo looked inquiringly at Pelle. I am Pelle. I was hosted by your sisters last night and we have traveled together, he said to Mesanjo as the other 2 made no effort to introduce him. They seemed to have forgotten all about him. They had eyes only for the sister now. Well, Gothenburg asked, has it happened? Mesanjo's face was expressionless for some moments, and then she burst out, I'm pregnant. The older sisters laughed and hugged each other and took turns to touch the rounded tummy of their sister. Mesanjo told them how it had happened. When I was bringing in the herbs I'd put out to dry, I heard the rain coming, and before I could reach the house, a drop of rain fell on me, a single drop of rain. One moment, the sky was overcast with angry clouds thundering and threatening, and the next moment, all was clear again. The clouds passed over our village, and nothing happened. Nothing, except for that one drop of rain. I felt the baby grow inside as soon as that drop landed on me. Pelle exclaimed, "You are the woman they speak of in my village, the one whose husband and 7 sons were killed by a tiger." Messagno smiled at him in confirmation of the fact. The smile lighted up her face. She was transparently beautiful, not young, just sort of ageless in a way that defied time and decay. Like her name, which meant the pure one, she exuded a purity of spirit that was not lost on Pele. If she was the ancient pair's sister, she must be at least 200 or 300 years old, thought Pele. He smiled at how ludicrous the concept of time had become ever since he met these women. Come and sup with me," she invited them all.
Thank you. Easterine, this is one of my favorites of your rich production. I really love this book. Will you tell us a little bit more about what happens? What is the Village of Weavers, and what is a spirit tiger?
This is, of course, an allegorical book, as you probably guessed in the beginning, because the ancient sisters are 300 years old, 380 and 400 years old. So that can only happen in an allegory. And the Village of Weavers is also a mythical village where most of the action happens. And the spirit tiger is something that all of us probably encounter in life. Is the tiger of our fears, our inner fears, our outer fears, and then it's the tiger that's designed to destroy us, which we need to destroy. And it could also relate to the story of Christ and how he dies for humanity. So it has all these levels to it.
Yes, I recall that in one of your other books that is in this along the same line about Ville, when the river sleeps, there is also a were tiger. So is that the same allegory, or what does the tiger represent in the tradition?
Yes. For the Naga, the tiger is always a symbol of might and a symbol of destruction. And it's very, very present in the spirit world that we believe in. So this is all connected to the spirit world. And as a Naga, I can say that we accept the parallel existence of the material world with the spirit world. And we believe in life after death and the coexistence of men and spirits. So because of that, these stories come from that core, the core of that belief. Right. Yeah.
It is. So there's a base in these stories from Naga traditional oral stories.
Yes, indeed. And since I've grown up in that culture, it comes naturally to me.
You mentioned that your publisher says that this is in the genre of fantasy. Would that be correct?
For them, it is fantasy, and I can understand that they would think of it as fantasy, but not for me, and not for my Naga readers. It's the other reality that we embrace without any lack of faith.
Beautiful. I think before we would delve deeper into the oral history and traditions of the Naga, I think maybe we should take one step back. And I think very few people who listen are much aware of what Nagaland is, where the Naga hills are, the traditions and the history. Will you give us a little insight?
Yes, thank you, Fredrik. I was thinking I should answer the question, who are the Nagas? And the answer is they are the indigenous inhabitants of the Naga Hills. And I use the term Naga Hills because that is a pre-British mapping term. Before British mapping, which happened in 1947, the Naga people occupied a very big territory. And after British mapping, these territories were divided into half. Half was given to India, the new nation of India, and half was given to the new nation of Burma. So what happened was that there are about 16 official tribes of the Nagas in northeast India, in the Indian half, and then there are officially about 10 tribes of the Nagas on the Burmese half. But we always think of the borders and the mapping as artificial because it never existed before the British did this. And so you will find Naga tribes living not only in Burma and in India, but within India in several states, several neighboring states like Manipur, Assam, Arunachal, because when India became a new nation, it further divided the Naga areas. So we've had mapping on both sides, and we've had all these artificial partitions. Should I just continue?
Yes, please. It is very interesting.
Okay. Yeah. We have several tribes which have different migration narratives, but it's very interesting that archaeological excavations, recent ones, they give the dating for Naga settlement in the present area of northeast India as 10 CE. So we've been there a very long time, and it's not surprising that the migration narratives are a little obscure because we've only depended on oral sources. But very interestingly, there's a tribe called the Lotha who are very straightforward about their migration routes. And they say they claim that they migrated from Mongolia via China, entered into inner Burma, and then finally came to what is presently northeast India. So these are the Nagas, and we live now in landlocked villages and towns, but we've had a seafaring past, and this is very evident in our jewelry. We use conches and shells, and also we use a wonderful instrument called the log drum, which is shaped like a boat. So that is a bit about our background. We have a monolithic culture. So if you come, you'll see a lot of memorial stones set up by the wayside, and they used to commemorate all kinds of events. It could be deaths, or it could be feasts of merit, it could be friendship feasts between villages. So the monoliths, they act as social memory, because the older generation is always telling the younger generation what they are for, and orally our history is transmitted. We also have a taboo culture. So the taboo is very prominent in our cultures. But you know, the beautiful thing about the taboo is that it teaches social behavior. So it's like the school. And then the best taboo, I think, is the taboo that teaches that it's wrong to mistreat people with who have physical challenges or who are mentally unstable. And so they're protected by the taboos. And another taboo that I'd like to mention is the agricultural taboo, which says that you cannot eat your seed grain. You always have to keep aside seed grain, and that's not to be consumed. So in this way, agricultural life and economic life is protected by the taboos. Yeah.
Yes.
Should I continue?
Yes, please, if you
Okay.
wish. Yeah.
Yeah. And we also have a classless society that's divided into clans and subclans. And it's very interesting because the clans and the subclans, they have customary laws, they look after land, and whenever there are disputes, they settle the disputes through a village court. So that is how the village polity functions. And then I know that in other societies, they have different periods. They have the hunter-gatherer period, and then they have the farmer-settler period. But for us, all of that comes together because we still, even though we have towns and villages and universities and schools and colleges, we still are able to get food from the forests. We get edible herbs and we get medicinal herbs. So we still have some of the hunter-gatherer in us. And I think that's something to be proud of and brag a little.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think much of your writing circles around harvests and agricultural, and I'm thinking that the oral traditions must be part of it to convey the knowledge on how to use the land.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that because we have come from an oral tradition, so everything is passed or was passed on from the older to the younger, and we've had community houses, which are not used so much nowadays, but in the past there would be different age groups congregating in these community houses, and it was their school because elders would pass on their knowledge and information to the younger people.
I know you once mentioned the elders as the living books. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So bringing forward the oral tradition, this is you have for many years that has become your task. Are you the only one taking down the oral traditions, and how much alive are the oral traditions in the culture these days?
Oh, I'm not the only one, thank goodness. Now there are many, many young scholars, and it's wonderful that they have this connection, and we have much unwritten history and many cultural practices that are unwritten. And I should tell you, Fredrik, that that there are colleges which give assignments to their students, and because there are no books available on the data that they need, they telephone their parents at home, and the whole village becomes involved in collecting data for one student's assignment.
Oh, beautiful.
So that's how it still works, yes.
Yeah.
So I guess that is the oral culture still at work. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I know you do a lot of research for your books, and I want to mention A Respectable Woman, for example, which is a beautiful, beautiful book, which deals with the loss and memory, and brings back the memories of the Battle of Kohima 40 years later, and the old generation tells through their memory what happened and how they have dealt with it over the years.
Yes, thank you, Fredrik, for that reminder, because we still have this situation where many of our elders, when they die, their memories die with them. So we lose our living libraries when they die, and that's a loss that we're still trying to remedy. When I wrote Respectable Woman, I realized we didn't have any books on post-war. You know, we had this huge battle in Kohima, and it was the Japanese trying to invade India, and they were stopped in Kohima, my hometown. It was the 31st Division of the Japanese army, and there was a huge battle. But after the battle, people had not had the stability to write down their memories, and we can't blame them, because the more important thing was rebuilding the houses and rebuilding life. Yes, so when I realized that so many years later, I started to collect memories of the people who had seen it, like my mother. She was 12 when the war happened. Then my older cousins who could remember the post-war years, older cousins who were in the 70s, then other people who were in their 80s. So I was so fortunate to be able to accumulate and collect all these memories and then put them into book form in A Respectable Woman. Yeah, so we're continuing with that, and I keep encouraging people to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you also did an enormous work with this book. Yeah, it's a very dense and it's packed with knowledge, and it's called Walking the Roadless Road, Exploring the Tribes of Nagaland, and here you have a huge endeavor to combine the written scholarly knowledge historically, and to combine that with the memories of the people and the oral traditions. Can you tell me a little bit about? It must have been. You must have spent a long time before you could gather all the material for this book.
It wasn't easy. Not just because it was nonfiction. It's so much easier to write fiction. But this sort of thing where I was trying to write about all the 16 tribes living in Nagaland, it took so much effort and traveling. Then I'm so grateful for the internet, because some things could happen through interviews on the internet. But a lot of it had to be conducted in the places, in the villages, and just keep collecting and also verify, because it was not enough just to have the data. I had to have it verified, and that itself was quite a task. I guess I spent about 3 or 4 years, yes, definitely 4 or 5 years collecting and writing it, then verifying, yeah. And it was very timely, because many of the narrators died after that. So I'm just grateful I managed to write it when I did.
Yes. So we have talked previously the other day about the silence narratives and the importance of can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts around that?
Yeah, right. What I meant by the silence narratives is it reflects our history, because we've had a very difficult history, starting from the 1800s. British entry into our hills started in 1832, and they were trying to make a road between 2 neighboring states. So they were trying to connect Assam and Manipur, which were both under British jurisdiction. But the Nagas had not surrendered to the British. So we gave them a lot of trouble. Whenever they send expeditions, the Nagas would attack them with arrows and spears, and we didn't have guns then. So what the British did was to establish their power and to burn down villages. So every time that happened, some villages were burned 4 or 5 times, 6, 7, 8 times. Every time that happened, it silenced our narratives. Because we are an oral culture, we need stability for people to narrate their stories, for storytellings to happen. And you can't do that in a burnt house. You can't do that in the midst of war. So that was one long period when our narratives were silenced. And then it happened again in the Second World War, during the period of the Second World War, when the Japanese came. Whole populations were evacuated. People in the villages fled into the forests and the fields, and their houses were bombed. Houses were completely bombed. My grandfather's house was flattened. They had to rebuild. And the bombing was done by the British trying to bomb out the Japanese. So again, there was a long period of silence narratives. And by the time of the Second World War, they had schools and hospitals. But everything had to be restarted, reset after the war. Yeah, and then 2 years later, the Nagas were fighting not to be a part of India. And again, many villages were burned and people had to leave their homes and live in the forest. So all these things happening in our history, I call them the silence periods, the periods of silence narratives for the Nagas. And so we've lost a lot of our stories because of those interruptions.
Yes. So in the bombing of the people and the land, they actually also bombed and wiped out the stories, and there might be stories that are gone forever. Would you feel that also the occupiers, the British, that they replaced the narrative of the region and of the people with another narrative?
Yes, it's not just me, but a lot of people share that view. Because what happened was we became a British colony, and there was great anthropological interest in our way of life. And then anthropologists would come in, study us, and write us. So it was others writing us. It was the colonial gaze on us. It was never a Naga-centric view. It was a Eurocentric view. So, well, we can't blame them. They didn't understand our cultures. They didn't understand our practices. So if they termed it as savage and barbaric, can't really blame them because it would appear like that to them. But now we've begun to write ourselves. And we began writing ourselves from the 70s because the government began this huge project of collecting folklore. It was done very roughly, but the important thing is it was done. Then there were a lot of academic exercises around this time, the 70s. So books exist written by Naga scholars, and that has accelerated. And that is the insider view, the Naga-centric view. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the importance of I mean, the danger of the single story that we often talk about, and the importance then of having your own storytelling. But can they, because in Walking the Roadless Road, you actually combine, you don't replace, you combine previous narratives with new narratives in a very humble and thorough, very thorough way, and that becomes like a third sort of narrative, or how should I look at it? Would that be correct?
That's so interesting that you call it a third narrative, because whatever it is, I'm very grateful for the writings that were done on us from the 1800s, because if those things were not done, we wouldn't have anything to go by that covers that period. Yeah, so I've been able to use that to refer to that when writing Roadless Road, and actually we are grateful for things like missionary writing, which also exists, then many official documents by European colonizers, which exist, because that gives us some history of our people.
Is the tradition of oral storytelling, would you say that it is alive still today?
Oh, it's dying out. And a new thing is happening. Because the reading culture, which was not very strong earlier, since we had the oral culture, the reading culture is coming into Nagaland, and young Nagas are reading. So I think that's also a very good thing.
Will that give birth to new Naga writers, you think? Will the
Yes,
reading
it
create
already
writers?
has. Yes, it already has. There are many young Naga writers writing short stories, writing poetry, lots of poetry coming out, and writing songs. Because that's so much a part of our culture, the music, the poetry, the storytelling. So it comes naturally to them.
Beautiful. When writing down oral traditions, oral stories, is there in any way a risk that it becomes cast in amber? You know what I mean? That because if you have a tradition of telling stories, each person will add. But is there a point where it's cast in amber and will just be that sort of final story?
We are trying to deal with that, because villages own stories for us. So if one village tells a story which is not its own, the village that is the owner would come in and say, it's not like that, this is our story, and you're wrong there. So because of the ownership situation, it's a little different, I think. But we're trying to explain to villagers that there can be variations of one story, and because the stories travel. It's still a very young art or very young discipline. Yeah. The written form.
Yes. So are there ways of keeping the art form of oral storytelling? Are there festivals? Do the villages tell the stories to each other? Are there competitions in storytelling? Is there anything of that sort to sort of bring that forward?
There There are festivals. I must explain to you that because we are an agricultural society, we have festivals around the year. And my understanding of festivals is that the festivals after every agricultural work, labor, when one agricultural labor is completed, like plowing or sowing, then it's followed up by a festival. So throughout the year you have festivals, and the intention of the festivals is to let the farmers get some respite from his work. So storytelling is not always a part of festivals, but it is a natural part of village life. Yes, so you'd find after the evening meal, the grandmother gathering her grandchildren around her, around the fireplace, because that is the setting of the folk tale, and she would be relating stories to them. Yeah, and I hope that travels to the modern constructed festivals that we have, because we have a big constructed festival. We haven't thought of incorporating storytelling there yet, but it's high time.
Wonderful. So I would like to move over to your last, sorry, not your last, your latest project, the House of Memory. Will you tell us a little bit about why and what it will be?
Yeah, yeah. As I was saying earlier, Fredrik, we've encountered loss when our oral narrators die, when just very old people die, because we lose living libraries and there's no way of getting them back. Yeah, so I started this little project called House of Memory, and House of Memory wants to address this loss. And sitting here in northern Norway, I've phoned many people, phoned the children children who had parents who were in the 80s, so I could explain it to them. And I've also phoned people who are in the 70s and 80s and requested them to write their memories or just to record them, because many of them have amazing stories and they've responded very positively. So some are saying that they've already written it down, and some are in the process of writing. And the hope for House of Memory is we will keep collecting all these stories of people, and then we will be able to have our own history, because our unwritten history will come out of all these narratives. Yes. And I should also add that there is a small film company. It's called Take One. It's run by young Nagas. They want to be part of it. And if we ever get funding, they will make videos. So all the videos, all the recordings will one day be stored so that people can come and listen to it and learn from it. Then it'll really be a house of memory.
Beautiful. So I think this can be very inspiring for many others. So it will be disseminated through films and also a new book or exhibitions.
Many books.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. We have 5 more minutes, so I would like to ask if there's anything more you feel that you want to tell, or anything you would like to read to us, or anything that we haven't covered.
Yeah. in the House of Memory, in the videos and the recordings, which will happen at a later stage. I'm hoping that Naga poets will become part of it, because they have this really beautiful poetic tradition where a poem is actually a song. It's composed with a very rigid pattern of 9 syllables, because it is not just a poem, it's a song. So, and then it contains a story. So as he chants the poem, which I can do, but as he chants the poem, the story is told. And it's really very different from poetry here in the West. And the stories are known to the community. So the poems are also shared by the community. They belong to the community. They have long poem song cycles. I hope it's very ambitious, but if we get enough funding, it'll be possible to record all this. And it'll be such a treasure to leave to the younger generations. Yeah. Yes, I guess that's all I want to say.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Fredrik.
Thank you so much, Easterine, and thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you as always, and I think we have learned very, very much today. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Maybe I should take the last minute to give a little bit more of the frame of the Freedom Talks. The Freedom Talks is one of the good things that came out of the terrible COVID situation, when we realized we had to start streaming some events because we could not gather as we used to do. So our organization organizes the Safe Havens Conference each year, and some of the conversations we wanted to have there, we then decided to have over the year as a streamed event. And we could also see that this would be a very good way of maybe decolonizing the conversations by not always having them from one place in Europe specifically, but to let them travel and to have these conversations happen around the world. So all these Freedom Talks that happen roughly once a month, they have happened and will happen in different parts of the world, and we will learn a lot. We have a Facebook page that is called Safe Havens I'll say it again. It's called Safe Havens Freedom Talks. We also collaborate with an organization called HowlRound, howlround.com. They have our archives. So far we've done, I think it's 7 or 8 Freedom Talks, and they're all gathered there if you want to go in and look at them. So welcome back to the next Freedom Talk, and thank you again so much, Easterine, Kire. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.